Well, we have the idea that a church that is raised up in a country is permanent, but that the international worker team sent to a country to help birth and establish and nurture a church is temporary. So you have church permanent, international worker team temporary. What that means is that there will come a time when the international worker team is no longer as strategic and as needed as it once was in the birthing and nurturing of a church. And that time tends to come when that church is strong enough to stand on its own without support from an outside entity such as the Christian Missionary Alliance of North America. And that church is able to reproduce and carry on the ministry to the fringes of its own nation and even beyond its borders without that continuing assistance from the outside. It's become truly a church that's rooted in the local language, led by local leaders, living out the Christian life in the context of the local culture, and it's come to the point of maturity and strength where it can carry on without help from the outside. And when that time begins to come, the missionary team or the international worker team needs to understand its temporary nature as opposed to the long-term permanent nature of the church. And so, to give a word picture here, it's as if the church is a building being built, a construction project where a new building is being erected. And as that building is erected, the mission is like the scaffolding around the building. And there comes a time when the building is built, the project is completed, and the workers who were using all that scaffolding are no longer needed. And that's when it's time to do what I call transition. Transition is the idea of the mission decreasing its investment, beginning to withdraw some of its international worker personnel so that the church is there and can carry on with strength after the investment from outside the country and the foreign personnel have left. In other words, the scaffolding has been dismantled, and the scaffolding then can be moved to another, more needy place. And so this is the picture we see with Paul in the New Testament. He stayed anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of years when he planted a church. He nurtured that church initially, but he quickly turned it over to local leaders. And in the same way, we want to be moving to places that are more needy, and we do that by finishing our work in one place and then moving on to another. And so let me share with you 5 key insights about this transition process. And the first one is that it needs to be done in dialogue as opposed to being done monologically. So it should be dialogical transition, not monological transition. Let me explain what I mean. Monological transition is when the mission on its own decides to withdraw its financial resources and withdraw its workers without consulting the emerging church. I'm suggesting that it's much wiser and healthier to interface and interact with that developing church and talk with them about when it's going to be best to transition. Let them know that transition is inevitable, it's forthcoming, we're not here forever, we're temporary, you're permanent, and so we want to have dialogue with them. So that's a key element of healthy transition. A second one is that healthy transition is gradual, it is not abrupt. There was a Lutheran group in Zambia that actually, back in the 1960s, left overnight. So in the evening, when the local African church leaders went to bed, their international workers were still there with them. In the morning when they got up, to their consternation, the international workers had left. It was absolutely abrupt, and it left very negative feelings in the mind of those Zambian church leaders, and they were ill prepared for the transition that was so abrupt. So I envision transition as something that's more gradual. If I had to state a timeline, I would say something like a 5 to 7 year transition plan is probably going to be much better and much healthier than something that is done in a week or in a month, or in the Zambia case, in just one day. So the idea of gradual transition as opposed to abrupt transition. A third critical idea is that in the process of transition, we effectively care for the people involved. And I'm talking specifically about the international workers, because for them, they've invested so much in learning the local language, building a network of relationships with local people. They love those people love them. The international workers have invested much to learn the local culture, and so to uproot them from that is a very emotionally trying experience for them. So we have to handle this with tender, loving care, and we have to realize that the workers will have needs as we work through this process. They need to know that there's somewhere else where they can go and serve. They need to know that they're going to be well cared for by the sending churches. They need to know that their work has been valued and appreciated and has enabled this whole transition process to take place. It's only as international workers do their job with excellence that a transition can effectively take place. So there's much to celebrate with these international workers, but they also feel great loss in this process. And we must understand their feeling of loss and help them work through that in as healthy a manner as we possibly can, demonstrating love and care for them in the process. There's another caring dimension, and that is that the church from which international workers are transitioning often will have feelings of being abandoned. And this is true especially in countries where there is a struggle with poverty. They see the presence of the international worker as a way to connect with some funding. Their fear is when the international worker leaves, some of the funding we've enjoyed will also leave, and there is some truth in that. And so they need help in understanding that even though our international workers will no longer be living here, there's something that we greatly value. We value continuing relationship with you as a family of churches. And we want to nurture that relationship in years to come. And here are some of the ways we plan to do that. And so after transition from a family of churches, there can be a variety of ways in which that relationship continues to be nurtured. Occasional visits back to the country, sending some international workers for specific short-term ministry responsibilities, having conferences where international workers and some representatives from the church from which transition has taken place have opportunity to interact, exchanging prayer concerns and communications with one another. There are all kinds of ways to continue to have relationship even though the international workers are no longer there working so closely as they once were with the developing church. And so that sense of helping them deal with their feelings of abandonment is very, very important. A final insight I would share about transition is that it's always filled with tension and difficulty. There is just no easy way to do this. People's feelings get hurt, people feel pain, people feel angst of spirit, people feel abandonment, and inevitably this is hard work. And so there's no simple solution. As we take down this scaffolding, that temporary framework around the more permanent structure that we call the church, that missionary scaffolding and its dismantlement is painful. And so there will be tension, and we need to live with great grace and sensitivity so that we help people resolve those tensions in the best possible ways. Transitions are common in life, and when we have a transition, I think there is so much that we can celebrate when we are leaving behind a strong family of churches that can continue carrying out Christ's mission among their own people, all the way out to the fringes of their own nation, and then even moving beyond their own national boundaries so that they truly are expressing their missionary nature as a church and living the call together with us in carrying out Christ's mission. That ultimately is what effective and healthy transition enables us to do, to continue carrying out that mission in other places. And so may we be people who work through transition in very God-honoring ways, leaving behind a strong church and caring for our personnel well as we move the scaffolding to a new location to start the process all over again.